What's happening, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Crossed Up. Anthony Sanfilippo's here on Bob Wankel, doing it early on a Thursday morning on an off day. Something a little bit different this week. Usually we record on Friday mornings, but we figured with the day off, it's a nice break in the schedule here. And we could talk a little bit about what was, I guess, a disappointing road trip for the Phillies in Colorado and San Francisco. They dropped 4 out of the 6 games, and it's the first time in a really long time that anybody's had anything of real substance, I guess, to complain about or worry about or whatever it is that you want to call it. And Anthony, I'll bring you in here, and I guess just let's get the high-level overall assessment of what you saw over these last 6 games, which I know everybody's not real thrilled about, I guess.
Yeah, it sucked. I mean, let's be honest, right? I mean, it was not great baseball overall, the 6 games. And, you go 2-4 on the trip. Okay, fine. Right. I think we said last week that if they go 3-3, you take it and just say, yeah, okay. Yeah, you're probably not happy with it, but you take it. They went 2-4, so it did even worse. Right. In the grand scheme of things, is it a big worry? It's not, because every team in baseball has these stretches. In all honesty, like I had our intern, Aiden, go through and look at every winning team this year, and they've all had stretches of that were this bad, if not worse. And that's every winning team in baseball. And I didn't even look at the losing teams, just the winning teams. And I have some of the data there, so we could do a comparator. But so in the grand scheme, it's not a big deal. But the reality of it is that you look at little things and you say, that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen. And that happened, a couple things that happened in multiple games. And like, okay, those things shouldn't happen. So you don't freak out about them, but you kind of put them in your memory bank and you go, let's see if that comes up again. Because if that comes up again and it starts to become a little bit more of a chronic thing, then we got something to talk about down the line.
I think I sometimes tap into what the reaction online is a little bit too much because when you invest your time in these games and you watch the games and you communicate with other fans and you're just kind of taking in the way that everybody else is taking in the games, certainly when things aren't going well, it's going to skew negative. And I don't think that most people that are watching these games or watch this team play over the last week are sitting here really hitting the panic button or saying, maybe this team isn't as good as I thought they were. Like, I just think it's kind of a gross overreaction to take a 2-series, 6-game sample and say, hey, what we watched for 2 months isn't actually real. This is that Phillies team that I have been worried about. This is the real Phillies. Like, I don't want to say I can't bring myself to like have that conversation, but I think that there's some ways to sort of take in what we watched this past week and say, all right, this isn't good, or I don't get this. But also with the understanding that you wake up today and they're 21 games over 500. They're still up 6 games over the Braves, who all of a sudden can't hit it all, just lost the best offensive player. And they have a ton of injury issues, even in that rotation. They're bringing up prospects, sending guys down. Like they're in a total state of flux right now. I think the only thing that I would say that I found disappointing about this past week was that the Phillies really had a chance to sort of create serious distance between themselves and the Braves. I mean, the Braves have not played well, and it's good for the Phillies that they didn't really lose any ground, but they could have really stepped on the gas here and put 8-9 games between them. So let me start here. The one thing that I keep coming back to, even with a lackluster 6-game trip here, is, man, this team can pitch. I mean, they can really pitch. Mm-hmm. You saw what Zach Wheeler did on Tuesday night. He was phenomenal. He was in total control of that game. The bullpen was outstanding in that game as well. Obviously, Matt Strahm gives up the bogus run in the 10th. And then you come back yesterday, and I didn't feel great going into that game. Like, Cristopher Sanchez, I think, has earned the right to be trusted. But you just never quite know. You don't feel with Cristopher Sanchez the way that you do with Ranger Suarez or with Zach Wheeler. But, man, he's been so damn good. And he was just in total control yesterday. And when you look at how poorly the Phillies have played in previous games, I just didn't know. I said, maybe this is one where it just totally gets away from them. They get swept. They come back to Philly 1-5 off this trip. And he, like Zach Wheeler the night before, they pitched like stoppers. I mean, 6 innings, 4 hits, 1 walk, 7 strikeouts, in total command of that baseball game yesterday. And almost his performance alone sort of undid a lot of the negative vibes I had watching this past week. Because now I'm looking at it and saying, damn, dude, like, this guy's pitching like a 2 or a 3, and he really is clearly your 4. I mean, clearly your 4. There's other things that they got to mop up here. There's other things that they need to work on. There's other things we can talk about, which we will. But like, I almost feel like we have to start there. How good has this guy been?
Yeah, I was actually talking about this with Jody Mack on WIP last night, and the thing of it is, Bob, he had a nice year last year, right? When he came in and kind of saved the rotation, and we've all talked about that. But I think that both you and I were a little bit skeptical that he would be able to replicate that this year, right? To this point, not only has he replicated it, he's been better. Okay. And the last couple starts are the ones that I find the most eye-opening, in the sense that he's now got his fastball up to 97, right? That's not a velocity that he's ever had really in his arsenal. His sinker, which teams would hit with regularity and are still hitting it pretty good overall when you look at the overall numbers for the year. But in the last couple of games, it's jumped up from 94, 95 to 97. That's a big difference maker because he's a changeup pitcher. So now you're adding an extra couple of miles per hour difference between the sinker and the changeup. And I think that makes him much more of a difficult pitcher to hit. Not only that, I've seen this season something that I didn't see last season with him, and it's a mental toughness. When he gets guys on base, he figures out how to get out of it.
Yeah.
And you saw it yesterday when he had bases loaded. The one jam that he had, bases loaded, and then he has the strikeout, and he shows a little bit of emotion, right, on that strikeout. He pumps his fist and lets out a yell. That's not something you've ever seen out of Cristopher Sanchez. Matter of fact, Cristopher Sanchez has always had that deer in headlights look sometimes, and I don't say that as a negative. It's just that he's never been a in the moment kind of guy, and there in that moment he was in the moment and said, I'm going to throw my best pitch and get this guy out on a 3-2 situation with the bases loaded, and damn it, he nailed it. And that is a maturation of a pitcher that you don't get to see all that often. And the credit to the Phillies pitching coaches, right, mostly, but development with him, because he has now become, in my mind, a legitimate guy in this rotation.
Well, what's amazing here, just look at the big picture. 21st in Major League Baseball among all starters in ERA, 2.83. He's 5th and 5th, dude. Like 5th.
Yeah.
2.48. Better than Ranger Suarez. I mean, like, it's crazy. Like, as good as Suarez has been, he leads the National League in ERA amongst all starters. Like, guy's got a better FIP. And then you look at WAR. Like, again, Fangraphs WAR. It's Wheeler is 4th at 2.2. We have Sanchez 10th, 1.9. Suarez is 6th at 2.1. You have 3 guys in the top 10 right now. I mean, he's up there basically competing with guys that we're talking about as Cy Young favorites in a lot of different categories. Now, he's not that. I'm not saying he's that. But when you start to get to that point in your rotation and you're getting that type of production, like, you can sit here and bitch about the offense, and we can. Let's do that. But I just think when you look at this team long term, are they going to win 117 games? No. Are they going to win 105 games? I don't know. I guess I'd bet against it. I'm not really even sure. But this is where, when things don't go well, I will always revert back to the baseline of, you have 4 guys that anytime they take the ball, they can absolutely dominate you. And when I look across the landscape of the National League, especially in this moment, I don't think that there's another team that touches the Phillies. No. And so you can piss and moan after losing 1-0 in 10 innings at 2:05 a.m. or I'm sorry, 12:05 a.m. I get it. Like, that game on Tuesday night was absolutely outrageous. It was a ridiculous display of offensive baseball. You couldn't hit Spencer Howard. Like, come on, man, right? Like, I get that. I totally get that. But when you take a deep breath and you say, like, this starting staff, it's just so damn good.
Yeah, and here's the thing I want to share with you, Bob, based off of Aiden's research. So there's 14 teams that have a winning record in Major League Baseball right now. They've all had a stretch of 5 games where they were not good. I think the Yankees and the Royals are, I think, the only team that didn't lose 4 out of 5. But they had some pretty meager numbers. But here's the thing: of all 14 teams in those 5-game stretches, the Phillies are the only one that had an ERA under 3. Think about that. They went 1-4, and their ERA in those games was 2.8. Yeah. There was only 2 other teams that were even under 4.
Because you got 2 phenomenal starts by Sanchez. Nola worked his way through some early struggles, turned in a very good start in Colorado. Ranger Suarez, we talked about this earlier in the week. It took him 2 innings to figure it out, but then he did. Zach Wheeler was brilliant.
Yeah.
The only guy that was what word do I want to use to describe this? I'm trying to we have the Phillies listen to this. Some guys in the organization listen to this. Like, I want to be
more than some.
I want to choose my words carefully here.
Yeah.
I would actually let's just hold off. I'm going to choose no word. We'll talk about Taijuan Walker specifically, because you can't do a Phillies podcast without talking about Taijuan Walker for at least 10 minutes these days.
And I got something on him too. So it'll be good. We'll make a segment out of it. Yeah.
All right, great. So yeah, we'll hold off on that. But look, I mean, just again, it was not a good week. It's the first time all season that they've lost 3 games consecutively. We had talked about it with the Colorado series. It was the first time that they had lost a series since early April. You're just, no matter how good you are, you're not going to win every series. You're not going to win every road trip. But yes, it was disappointing. I'm not going to come on here and try to sound like an apologist.
No, but
Tuesday night, man, I was like, what are they doing?
Yeah, I got to give you credit though, Bob, because I think you sniffed this out in advance. Because you, in the last episode, you asked this question, and I missed it. Like, I thought they were going to win 5 out of 6.
Drinking that red Kool-Aid.
Yeah, I completely didn't see it coming. I kind of thought that, my difference is not necessarily drinking the Kool-Aid as much as it was, I've kind of got the sense that this team this year is kind of like on this revenge tour kind of thing, and they want to exercise every bad demon that they've had in the last couple of years. And the fact that they have not played well in Colorado and San Francisco, I thought that was going to be part of it. And so that's why I thought that they were going to go out there and have a good road trip. And that if anything, they would probably, have the hiccups when they came back home against St. Louis and Milwaukee this week. And that's what I kind of thought this was the week that the hiccups were coming. But you saw it. You sniffed it out coming out last Friday, and you asked, is this a thing? Is this a trip that's going to get them?
I thought it was going to be 3-3. I thought you would get 2 out of 3 in Colorado. I thought you'd lose 2 out of 3 in San Francisco. And I would have had, the final 2 games wrong, because I think you win the Wheeler start, and then Sanchez doesn't beat the Giants on the road against Harrison, who has been pretty good. Pretty good before yesterday. He was horrible yesterday. All right, look, so a couple things that I think we absolutely need to talk about. The first thing I want to talk about today is Kyle Schwarber, and I think you're probably surprised by that, but I want to set the record straight. Our old friend from the Crossing Broad days, back in the day when we first joined, Mr. Kyle Scott sent me a text message, sent me a video of his son saying, like, that's what you get for talking bad about Kyle Schwarber on the podcast. So I've come to find out that Kyle's son is a big Crossed Up fan. And Kyle also said, I would appreciate it if you could stop using that one F-bomb per show. And I said, well, that's rich coming from you, but sure. And so I said, have I been talking poorly about Kyle Schwarber? So I just want to set the record straight here. I am not talking poorly about Kyle Schwarber. I don't know where we got the Crossed Up here, to be honest with you. So yesterday he leads off the game with a home run. He's 2 for 4. He's now hitting 246. He has a 794 OPS. The conversation has really just been how he's been a different hitter. He has not been the all or nothing 42 home run pace guy who's hitting a $190, who can't do anything else for you. He's been more of a complete offensive player this season for this team. The only concern, or I guess if you want to call it that I have, is that if Nick Castellanos isn't going to hit 30 home runs and he's going to hit 11 doubles this season, which is what he's on pace for, and we'll get to that in a minute. If he's not going to be that guy and you're having some of the other struggles with your offensive outfield, then I kind of would like to see Kyle Schwarber hit 35, 40 home runs in an ideal world, which in the last couple of days he's sort of gotten that going again, and we'll see what happens in June. I just want to see more power, but man, like I think there's a world where I might even just trade off that 7 less homers, maybe he finishes with 33. And if I'm going to get a guy that hits 240, 250, and the on-base percentage is what it is, like, is that the right trade-off? Like, is this year's Kyle Schwarber definitively better than last year's Kyle Schwarber?
Well, so here's how I look at it, Bob, and I'm comfortable with this version of Kyle Schwarber, even if he doesn't go on some massive June home run tear like he
very well may. I mean, history suggests that's going to happen.
Right, but even if he doesn't, all right, and he stays on this pace, I'll take a 794 OPS. I'll take a 369 on base percentage. I'll take a 246 batting average and an increase in runs batted in, because keep that in mind too. He hasn't hit as many home runs, and yet he's driving in more runs. So I will take all of those other things. If it means a little bit less power, I'll take that trade-off. Now, he doesn't want to take that trade-off. He said, dude, my swing's my swing. That's what he told me before they went out on that trip. And I asked him about this. And so like, he doesn't want that trade. He thinks the power is still going to be there, but he's adjusting to how he's being pitched. Yeah. Whereas maybe in the past he didn't. And I don't know if this is it comes with age kind of thing, right? You kind of start to realize, how much longer do I have in this game if I'm not getting pitches that I can drive out of the ballpark? So I better come up with a different way of being productive. And he's done it. I don't know if that's what it is, if it's just a commitment to this particular team to be different than last year so that we don't have the ending that we had last year. But whatever it is, it's working, and don't touch it. Like, I'm totally on board with this version of Kyle Schwarber. I think it's good. And he's just under 800 OPS and he's not hitting home runs. So what does that tell you? If he starts hitting the home runs, holy smokes, are you looking at having another huge piece of that lineup? Just, man, you got to get through that guy too, other than just pitching around him. Like, how do you play him? And where is he hitting these balls, Bob? Take a look at where the home run was. The left center field, right? He had a single to center field. He's hitting the ball. He's using up the middle a lot more than he was in the past.
Yeah, he's definitely been a much more complete hitter. I mean, here you go. Since he's joined the Phillies, 22, he hit 218. Last year, he hit $197. This year, he's up to 246. His on-base percentage has jumped from 323 to 343 to 369. Yeah. Obviously, the slug is significantly lower than it's been in years past, but the OPS, as you noted, is still knocking it on the door at 800. So you think that those home runs are probably going to come. He, to me, just seems like a much, much more complete hitter. And at the moment, he's projected to hit. He's on a 162-game pace of 31 homers, knock in 99 runs, walk 119 times. I mean, so it's still a pretty good season from a run production power standpoint. It's just not the standard that we're accustomed to. But if he gets on one of these heaters, and maybe we're starting to see the beginning of it with what we saw these past couple games in San Francisco, where it's not tremendously easy to hit home runs, by the way. Maybe he ends up pacing 35, 40, and then you're getting a guy who OPS is somewhere in the mid 800s, which would be by far the best offensive and most complete version of Kyle Schwarber that we've seen here. I just bring it up because we've already talked about it, and I'm using Kyle as like an anecdotal jumping point here, but I really do. I've been overall very impressed with him. I truly have been.
Yeah.
And if he can just put together one of those runs where he hits 5 home runs in 6 games, I think he's right back on that home run pace. And then all of a sudden you're saying, damn, you're really getting a good version of this guy. And that doesn't even talk about all the off the field clubhouse dynamic stuff, which I think he's absolutely crucial. A crucial part of that. When this is all said and done, people will ask me, like, who's your favorite Philly right now? And I'm like, well, that's kind of a weird thing for me to answer. Like, we get it, right? Like, if you zoom out on my camera here, you see Philly stuff in the background. We talk about it all the time. Grew up as a Phillies fan. I want the Phillies to win, but also you put the journalist cap on and you got to be objective about it. But people always say, like, who's the dude in that locker room? Who's the guy that you like most or that you have the most respect for? And it's not a shot at anybody else, but it's Kyle Schwarber for me.
Yeah.
Like, I think that he is the guy that that stirs the entire drink. I think that in 22, when they looked like they were about to do what they do every other year, it was Kyle Schwarber who sort of stabilized that thing and said, not this year. We're not doing this again. I really think that he's the guy. And so when I don't know if favorite is the right word these days.
I'll put it this way to you, Bob, right? And I feel like I have some good relationships with some of the players in there that I've developed in my 2.5 years of being down there regularly. But there's one thing I can tell you is I really am impressed by Schwarber because he's able to be so even keel at all times. He's able to, and he's the de facto captain of the team. I mean, I know Harper is viewed that way, but it's Schwarber's clubhouse, and we've discussed that in the past. And he never lets the team get too high. He never lets the team get too low. He's that guy. Yeah. And now this year, not only is he just saying it, not only is he just being the guy that talks about it, he's setting it by example on the field and doing the things that have to be done. He's showing you right now, he's willing to sacrifice being maybe the National League home run champion, or being in that home run championship race, right, every year, sacrificing that for the good of the team to make the team more dynamic. I mean, he's even stealing bases. He stole another base yesterday.
Does he have 4 steals now?
He's got 4 steals. I mean, it's on pace. I mean, if I would have told you,
double-digit steal guy.
If I would have told you at the beginning of the year, Kyle Schwarber is going to steal 16 bases this year, you would have laughed at me, right? I mean, but that's kind of like what he's doing, and he looks healthy. He looks slimmed down. His knee looks like it's not bothering him anymore. There's a lot to like about Kyle Schwarber, and yeah, so I understand why you say what you say, as he's a guy that you look at as your quote unquote favorite, because he has the ability to not let the moment get too big for him, and to be an impressive professional athlete and be able to answer the call when needed, both on the field, in the clubhouse, and even when talking to us. He's always available, and will always be, always. And that shouldn't be a measure of favoritism, right? It should just be the fact that he is a leader for this team, and that is something that really needs to be understood. And why what he's doing this year matters even that much more.
I want to talk a little bit about what happened in yesterday's game with Bryce Harper, and I would say that these two topics sort of tangentially run together. He gets buzzed a couple times up and in. He's obviously upset. He's missed time because of pitches like this. I totally understand his reaction. What did you kind of make of what happened after that? Didn't exactly bust it out of the box afterwards on a ground ball into the infield. I just kind of I think I want to say it like this. I've sort of really struggled with his season overall a little bit, because there are times where you look up and you see okay, he's hitting 275 with a 935 OPS. He's having almost maybe one of his best statistical seasons ever. He puts together some good at bats for you. He's doing a lot of really good things. He's played a very clean first base. He's the best player on a really good team. He's the best player on the best team. And then there's games where yesterday it's 1 for 5. He threw a couple of bats away, I thought, in this San Francisco series. There seems to be some I'm going to be careful with how I say this. Poutiness isn't the right word, but this doesn't seem totally dialed in, like he's enjoying himself. The vibe is not always awesome with him. I think it's fair to say that. What do you make of what his season has been to date, and kind of what's going on with him on a day-to-day basis?
I'm fine with his overall season. You look, like you said, you look at the numbers, and they are what they are. I mean, you can't deny that he's having the kind of year that he's had. I think what the Bryce's, if you're looking for his kryptonite, it's a self kryptonite, is that he's so uber competitive that he gets into his own. He gets into his own head a little bit. Now, he will tell you that he uses that to motivate himself to be better. And when you see the results, ultimately, they usually pan out. So it's hard to argue with that, that part of his game. Let him be a guy that gets very mad at himself when he doesn't succeed. on every at bat, and he's like that. He's that guy. He will dwell over every little thing. You've seen it when he takes his, I'm going to go up there and bat with no batting gloves on, right? Like he changes things up just because he needs to feel something different in order to hit, right? And that's what he does. And I think that there's going to be moments in a season where you kind of get a little bit like, all right, Bryce, that's, rein it in. Yeah. And I think yesterday is probably one of those moments where, in retrospect, when he goes and looks back at it, he probably sits there and goes, yeah, I should have ran a little bit harder there. But you're going to take that, right?
Well, and to be clear, I have no issue with his reaction to getting picked up and in on consecutive pitches, no less. Like, no problem with that. There's no criticism there. It's just like sometimes you see that frustration. It sort of boils over and it sort of plays out within the game where you're like, man, like,
did you see him smacking his bats on the bench and throwing his helmet? Like, I get it, right? I mean, and that's but and you said you don't want to use the word pouty. I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. I mean, hey, let's be honest. We're not calling him a baby. He's not that. But at the same time, that isn't, a thing. But he uses that. That's how he motivates himself. Right. And then, look, he comes out that next at bat and he gets a nice hit, right, to left center field, drives through the ball. It's a good at bat. Like, so you look at those things and say, I'll take that trade-off. It was the same concept that I had, and I never quite got the argument, right, when Jimmy Rollins, go back to Jimmy Rollins, and, he didn't run out a pitch and like everybody would go nuts. Jimmy Rollins doesn't run it out, whatever. But it's the same kind of competitive fire that fuels Bryce Harper is what fueled Jimmy Rollins. And it's why he was such a great catalyst for that team. Harper is certainly the catalyst for this Phillies team. There's no question about it. So why not accept it because he's that great of a player? I think you just take those moments and accept them. Now, if they were happening,
so it's almost to say like, it's an imperfect moment. It's a moment that in a vacuum you absolutely criticize, but when you understand the big picture,
correct,
and you also understand the dynamics within the clubhouse, which is like, that's Bryce. We know that he's going to be there when we need him. So whatever, right? Like, and it just, again, over 162, you kind of just understand the full dynamic here.
Correct.
But if you're a fan sitting at home and you watch that play out, you go, well, what the hell is that?
Yeah,
and that's fair too. That's okay.
Yeah, no, there's no problem with the fans reacting to that. Like, I'm not criticizing fans. Right. I'm just saying that.
Do you think in general? I think it's an interesting conversation that could be had. We don't need to have it in great detail right now, but do you think that sometimes we get a little bit too wrapped up in the way that that athletes sort of react in the moment or don't react in a moment? Like in this city, you just mentioned Jimmy Rollins, right? And we're talking about Bryce now, and go back to this past Eagles season. I mean, how much time was spent talking about Jalen Hurts' demeanor on the sidelines? And is he having fun? He seems like he doesn't even want to be there. What does this mean? Like, is there validity in conversations like that? Or do you think it's just something for us to talk about?
I think you have to be, I think there is validity, but you have to be selective about it. And what I mean by that is every one of these situations is unique and different. And you look at it and say, okay, we have to weigh the situation and the ramifications of the situation and what's going on around the player in the moment with the team and how they fit. Because this is going to be something we're going to talk about with one last thing today. And I know you know what we're going to do with one last thing because I texted you about it. But like the situation that is the team is in, I think dictates a lot of that. And so therefore you have to look at, and when you have a team that's successful, like the Phillies were with both Rollins and Harper, you kind of accept it. You need to accept it a little more. Whereas when Odubel Herrera wasn't running shit out, right, on a bad Phillies team, that's something you can let, because that is a bad attitude situation with a bad team. And so therefore it becomes a different conversation. Right. This is not a bad attitude player. This is a superstar who is mad at himself. And so, yeah, are there going to be moments like that? Sure. But again, they are so few and far between, and they may be more noticeable, but they're not detrimental.
Next thing I want to talk about, earlier this week, I turned on WIP's midday show with Joe Giglio and Hugh Douglas, and Joe Giglio, as he often does, had a pretty interesting take that people were not real enthusiastic about. And that was, hey, Trey Turner's working his way back. He'll probably be back in a couple of weeks. But when he comes back, they should hand him an outfield glove and let him go run around out in center or right field or something like that, because Edmundo Sosa's played very well this season. And when he comes back, they're going to put Edmundo Sosa on the bench. I actually want to have two separate conversations about this. The first is very direct. From a baseball perspective, does that make any sense to you whatsoever?
What, Sosa?
Yeah, get Sosa. Let Sosa play shortstop and let Trey Turner run around the outfield. He did it once before.
No, that in and of itself does not make sense to me, because Turner was not a good center fielder, and it was his rookie year, or maybe your second year. I forget what year it was, but he was not good. Obviously,
he's not a good shortstop either. But
no, but making him play center field, and secondarily, there is no track record to Edmundo Sosa being able to do what he's done for the last 90 at bats or whatever it is over the course of a full season. And in fact, and I brought this up with Jody last night as well, when you look back to last year when Sosa was playing every day as the third baseman because Harper was not right beginning of the year, right? In April, he was really good. Like, he put up some good numbers in April. Not as good as he's going right now, but he put up some good numbers. Then all of a sudden, he was kind of exposed a little bit. And, you're riding this heater with him right now, and that's fine. But I think if you leave him in the lineup, you're going to end up with something more akin to what you saw last year. And that's what you can't do.
This is what we do here, though, right? Like, you can't just let a player be a player and let him be what he is. Edmundo Sosa is a very valuable player who can hold down a spot for 2-3 weeks at a time. He can go on a run like we've seen. He's capable of it. Some teams would probably start the guy and have him hit 8-9 and be really happy with it. This team could, if it had to. You can't play this guy 162 games a year. We know he's going to be overexposed, and we know that it's going to be detrimental to his overall impact. We know this. But what we do here is we got to max out every single game. What's the best lineup tonight? How do we do this? And so, let's move Trey Turner to the outfield, which I agree with you. I think is frankly a preposterous suggestion. I like Joe, and I'm not going to sit here and rip on him or take swipes at him. But I actually think that frankly, in this particular instance, I actually think the suggestion is somewhat disingenuous, and maybe some other ones are as well. I just look at it and I wonder sometimes about the discourse. And this is the other conversation I want to have. Do you think that the discourse in this town, just in terms of sports talk radio, has just gotten so far off the rails that it's become, it's almost just like entertainment. It's pure entertainment. It's not even borderline intellectual anymore, where it's like turning on MTV to watch Jersey Shore. You're like, I know it's not good, but I'll watch it. It feels like everything's got to be a take all the time. I'm cool with that. I'm cool with having some takes. Joe especially, he's a take guy. And sometimes people are like, this is terrible. You shouldn't have a job. And I always give Joe credit, because what he does is he brings something to the table that you kind of almost see it. When you see what they're talking about and you pick it up on Twitter, you almost kind of just smile and you're like, oh yeah, here we go again. Know exactly how the fans are going to react to this. And I think he actually does a good job, though I don't agree with pretty much 80% of them. I think he does a good job articulating a defense of these viewpoints. And I think it can be interesting at times, but I almost just wonder in general, this morning, I'll go to the other station. It's they're talking about is Nick Sirianni in a no-win situation 99 days before the season starts? And I'm like, oh my God. Can't we just have an honest conversation occasionally about something?
Yeah. And look, I'm with you. I just have a problem with putting something out there and going all in behind it when it's ridiculous, right? It's one thing to bring it up and say, hey, here's something to chew on and to think about, but it's another, and to have a conversation about it like we do, we're having a conversation about it. But it's another thing to be declarative and say, this is what they should do. Oh, yeah. This is the best way. That's where it becomes that's where it becomes too far. That's where it goes too far for me. And I say, this isn't good, because to me, what it does, I think it's radio station like WIP is very influential on the fan base, in the sense of a lot of people listen to it, and that's where they formulate their opinions off of that conversation. And so what I think it does is I think it really dumbs down the fan base. And that's not fair. That's, to me, I don't think that that's good. Can you have a conversation about it? Can you bring it up on your show and talk about it? You can, but just don't make it such a declarative
what's
thing.
interesting to me is, like, WIP has been so dominant, and ultimately the ratings are the ratings, and they have goals and objectives and indicators that they're trying to meet. And clearly, in a lot of ways, they're doing that, and they are meeting them. And so I'm not a program director. I certainly do not host a talk show for 3 to 4 hours a day, 5 times per week. I would imagine that's probably pretty difficult to be engaging and thoughtful, and thought-provoking in a genuine manner every single day. I would imagine it's actually much harder than most sports fans realize.
But here, let me say it, and it is. You're 100% right, and I give them credit for being thought-provoking on 5 days a week, right? It's not an easy thing to do. But what made WIP what it was at the beginning was the fact that they brought in people to be on the air who actually took time in their jobs to go down to the games, to go talk to the coaches, the managers, the players, to the GMs, the executives, to really be in the atmosphere and around it, and not just sit at home and watch it and formulate those opinions. And you see the difference, Bob. Like, you mean, even in this episode earlier, you were like, I know there's a lot of people at the Phillies who listen to this show or whatever. And you're down there and you show face down there, and you got to, be part of it and put that journalist's hat on. If you just took a little bit of that time as a radio show host, a talk show host, and went down there, you probably wouldn't be as inflammatory. You probably wouldn't. Do
you think it should almost be? Do you think that should be required of their hosts?
I do, because I think you get a different perspective being down there. And this is why I always fought for the you mentioned Kyle Scott earlier, and I always had a fought with him about, not fought like yelled, but we had difference of opinion in that I believe in being credentialed as an outlet for Crossing Broad at these events, because I think it gives you a lot more perspective on what you're going to present, right, to your audience. And we have a very good audience on Crossing Broad, the biggest it's ever been. And the reason is,
I don't think that people realize. I actually don't think a lot of people realize the reach of Crossing Broad.
Yeah,
not the influence of who is reading it, but how many people are reading it.
Yeah.
I would venture to say, I won't throw anything out there specifically, but I think when you talk about some of the other publications, and the more institutional ones in the city, I think people would be very surprised to see some of those numbers.
Yeah, we compare, and there's no question about it. And so, like, I look at it and I sit there and say that because we have such, we are influential in that regard. We're putting stuff out there. We should be more accountable for what we're putting out there as opinion or as thoughts or as something for people to consider. And you don't always have to agree. You don't have to agree with us, right? We're not saying that anything we say or write has to be agreed with, but at the same time, at least we're down there kind of getting the feel and having conversations that aren't on TV or on the radio with players, with coaches, etc., that allow us to formulate an informed opinion, whether it's right or not. And look, I was wrong last week about the team. I said they're going to win 5 out of 6. I think they're in a good spot. I was obviously wrong. So you can still be wrong, but at the same time, you feel like you're providing some information that's more informed, as opposed to just, let me sit on my couch and figure out a way to stir people up. That's the difference.
I guess that could make some sense. I guess the counterpoint to that, though, is, again, like, it's ratings based. Obviously, they have an idea of what people are willing to engage with and listen to. And, Kyle, and this sort of crosses over into what Kyle used to say, which is like, great, go down there and be part of the herd. Now you're one of 12 people that's getting a quote and chasing the same story that everyone else is chasing. And now you don't have a unique take. You don't have an opinion that warrants, consideration to come to an alternative outlet like Crossing Broad. Really, I'll just put my own spin on it. Like, you are the more traditional journalist between both of us.
Right.
You are much more like, let me go stand next to, Cristopher Sanchez after a 6-inning start with the microphone or with your phone in his face and record it. Whereas, like, I kind of go down and I'm like, all right, like, I'm going to write my opinions about the game. I'm going to go down there and listen to this. If there's anything that's super noteworthy, I'll add it. Otherwise, I'm kind of down there just to more inform my own opinion and how I'm going to write.
Sure.
So that way I'm giving the fans the best possible blend of something a little bit more analytical, but also understanding the dynamics of what's playing out in the clubhouse. That's more of my approach.
And,
right?
and there's nothing wrong with that. And what I argue is, I feel that, and this is where I used to say to Kyle, I think there's value in, you do stick your microphone in Cristopher Sanchez's face and just record it or ask a question. It's irrelevant, actually, what's said, unless it's something that's really noteworthy.
I
right?
felt good tonight. I felt good about my
none of that is really
okay.
important. None of that is important. But having the access allows you to then go off and have that side conversation with Kyle Schwarber or Aaron Nola or Garrett Stubbs or whoever you were talking to, right? And have that conversation that's not being recorded, so to speak, and you're just talking. And so those conversations are that's where the real meat and potatoes comes in, and that's where you formulate opinions based off of things that you're told in those conversations that aren't just being part of the herd. And so that's what Kyle never quite understood what I was saying with that, I think, and that was why we had a difference of opinion. But at the same time, you suck it up and you go and sit in there with 10 other people and ask the same questions and get the same answers. I get it. Those are not nearly as important.
Well, it's interesting. Like, I go back to, and I think people are interested in hearing this. That's why I want to talk about it. But I went down there in the first year that I actually covered the team in person was in 2019. And at that time, I was there on a very consistent basis. I mean, I was there, I don't know, of the 81 home games, probably 60 of them. I mean, I was grinding at that point. It was pre-kids, the whole thing. And I felt like it was important as someone coming from Crossing Broad, especially, to establish that credibility. Like, kind of like, because I know for a fact when I was first down there, there were people that were looking at me like, you guys let them in? You let this guy in? Who the hell's this guy, right? So I felt like it was important to be able to prove that I could go in there and ask questions like everyone else and that I wasn't going to do anything insane or off the wall. But also, I struggled a little bit, I think, for a while, trying to balance how to be credible and sort of chase the herd like everyone else, but then also do something different. Because when you're just blogging at home, you need to be funnier. You need to be, you need to have a different take than everyone else. And it's taken me some time personally, I think, with, the newsletter, with the contributions to Crossing Broad, to find that voice. Because at the end of the day, I can't tell a story like Matt Gelb. I just can't. He's a great writer. Yeah. And if you want to know what's going on and you really want the nuts and bolts of the inside of the Philadelphia Phillies, like, that's a guy you got to go read, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to go chase quotes, like Todd Zalecki's been doing this for 20 years. Jim Salisbury, who was down there with me all the time, like, he's the guy. Like, so why would I write the same story as Todd or Jim? Like, I'm not going to separate myself doing that. B, they're much more sourced. C, they just have more journalistic chops than I do. So, like, that's why I sort of veer off and I'm like, let's dive into the numbers. Let's dive into what's happening, because, like, those guys aren't doing that as much. Like, go read at the end of the day, like a story that Jim wrote last year, or read a story that Todd writes. Like, I've got 1,300 words there, 900 of which are like, this is what's happened over the last 14 days. Take a look at this guy's numbers. Look at what he's doing here versus the rest of the league. That stuff's not appearing the day after a game in a game story. Right. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, but it's different, at least. It's different.
Yeah. And that's important. And it's finding a path there and saying, okay, there are people who are going to be interested in this, so I'll provide this alternative kind of viewpoint on it, and that's fine.
Like even the new podcast that those guys do, the Philly show. So it's Jim, it's Ruben, and it's Todd. Yeah, and they have Chase Utley on, and they're talking about the 08 years. Like, well, I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. So Ruben's going to give his Doc Halladay stories and talk about how analytics are ruining baseball and all of that. And like, that's fine. Cool. Like, but that's not, if I try to do that, what value am I providing you in trying to do that? Correct. So So it's interesting. But yeah, I mean, just wrap it up to back to WI.
That was a nice little tangent.
Yeah, I think that stuff's interesting. And I know that people that kind of sniff around the Crossing Broad product are always interested in things like that. And, I just go back and I thought that the Turner Sosa conversation was a good representation of, I don't want to say an overall issue, but just like to me, it's very interesting. I'm always fascinated by the approach that the radio stations take. And far be it from, it's not my place to be overly critical of how they go about their business, because it's not my business. And I don't know enough about it to have a solid take on it. But I just find it fascinating that it's like, let's overreact to 3-game sample here, bring that to the masses. Oh, wait, it's 100 days before NFL kickoff. Who's more on the hot seat, Jalen Hurts or Nick Sirianni? And I'm like, oh my God, like people, like, there's seriously an appetite for this.
Yeah. So so let's go just to kind of circle it back to that conversation. In 2023, first 28 games that Edmundo Sosa played. And remember, like I said, he was an everyday player because of the Harper situation. He hit 305, 333 on base, 809 OPS, right? It was pretty good. Then his next 35 games, 27 starts, 35 games, he hit 194, 202 on base, 549 OPS. That's why you can't keep Edmundo Sosa as an everyday player in your lineup when Trey Turner comes back.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
I'm with you. I just hijacked this conversation for 17 minutes to agree with you. All right, look, back to more pressing issues here. I got 2 more things that I definitely feel like we absolutely have to talk about.
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk a little bit about Nick Castellanos. I texted you yesterday that I have the definitive Nick Castellanos take, and I would have had the same take had yesterday's 3-for-5 performance not happened. Just a couple quick things here on him. So he has a 605 OPS this morning as we record, and that's the highest it's been this season since March 31st. So it's been 2 months, and in May he has a 697 OPS, which is not gruesome. It's not terrible. It's functional, I guess. His last 30 games, he has a 731 OPS, and certainly yesterday's performance pumped up these numbers. They'd be far worse had that game not happened. So I don't know how much yesterday really changes this conversation. Ultimately, he's now on pace for 20 homers. He hit 29 last year. He's only on pace for 11 doubles, which is incredible. A year after he hit 37 of them. They have to play him every day. And I guess I'm tired of people tweeting at me every time a lineup comes out, why the hell do they keep playing this guy? And I will admit, when I watched Spencer Howard on Tuesday night beat him with a 94-mile-an-hour belt-high fastball, I said, my God, this is like a new low point, really, in what we've seen from him this year. But look, you have to play him every day, and I will tell you why. 1, he makes $20 million a year. 2, he's going to make $20 million next year. 3, he's going to make $20 million the year after that. And if you don't want to hear about the contract, that's fine. I totally understand that. But the bottom line is you're coming off of a year in which this guy had over 60 extra base hits. He hit 272 for you, and he helped drive you to the postseason with hot stretches throughout the course of the year. It happened a season ago. It didn't happen 7 years ago. This isn't banking on 2014 Chase Utley being 2008 Chase Utley. Like, this guy can probably do what he did for you a season ago. That ability still has to exist within his body. There's no injury. There's no steep decline where you fall off a cliff to that degree because of a physical limitation. Nick Castellanos with Johan Rojas and Christian Pache and Whit Merrifield and Brandon Marsh, who only can hit right-handed pitching or has only shown the ability to do it at this point, provides the most offensive upside, ceiling, potential of anybody else that you are running out there. Nick Castellanos has been dreadful this season. It has been tough to watch for extended periods, series, weeks, homestands, road trips. It's been tough to watch. You have to let him play every single game and pray to God that he can put together a consistent run where he gets these numbers up to respectability, because it's in him. and they don't have a better option right now. And you've got to figure out what the hell you have by the time the trade deadline rolls around to figure out how aggressive you need to be to remedy your outfield deficiencies. It's the only option. No, you do not have to sit him for Christian Pache. No, you do not have to sit him for Whit Merrifield. You don't. Let him play. They're 21 games over 500. You have the luxury of figuring it out. What are we doing? Christian Pache? Like, no offense. But what are we doing?
Yeah.
You have to play him.
You do have to play him, and you've said it as about as best as could be said. I can't really add anything further to it because that's the thing. You have the luxury with the team being in the situation that it's in right now of being able to trot out guys who maybe have underperformed, like Castellanos, like Johan Rojas, which again, we've talked about him on this show, and we don't understand his role. But at the same time, when you're winning, as like the Phillies are winning, you can keep letting him go and say maybe he figures it out, maybe he gets better. And guys go through slumps, and you keep playing them because you can. The only thing I will add to it is I think that everybody was so disliked Castellanos so much 2 years ago in his first year here because he really underperformed what his expectation was. That he doesn't have as much of a runway with the fan base as maybe other guys would. Then he had a nice year last year, carried the team, and so therefore it was kind of like, okay, we maybe trust him a little bit, but not completely. And then he gets off to the start he gets off to this year, and it's like, oh man, he's right back to being that bad guy he was 2 years ago. You gave some numbers, and I'll put this one out there for you. So I just looked at the last 30 days, right, which goes from April 30th to May 29th, 27 games that the Phillies played. Nick Castellanos has had 116 plate appearances. This is his numbers. They're not all-star numbers by any stretch of the imagination, but you'll take them. He's hitting 245. His OPS is 755. He's got 10 extra base hits, right? 6 homers, 16 RBIs. It's not blow you away numbers, but it's also, if this was what was doing for the first month as well, no one's probably complaining about him right now. If he was a 245, 755 OPS, you're kind of like, yeah, he's our 6-7 hitter in the lineup. What's the big deal? So the first month was just so bad and so below his expectation that we're sticking with that until he gets really hot. And he hasn't gotten really hot. And he's a streaky hitter, and maybe that's coming. Maybe we're starting to see it now. He's been hitting the ball harder the last week to 2 weeks, whatever. That's fine. But if you look at it collectively over 106, which is a good number of plate appearances, 116 plate appearances, 245, 755 OPS, probably a little bit below what you want it to be, but not ridiculously so.
Look, you watch him play, you watch some of the at-bats, you watch some of the extended runs that he has, and there is no question it is tough to watch. There's no question that it's frustrating. I get it. Some of the at-bats look feeble. They look just totally unprepared. And I'm not even saying that's the case. I think that there is preparation. I listened to another commentator here recently. It was actually circulating the social media platforms this morning saying that, like, he needs to be more see ball, hit ball. Like, I agree with that to a degree. I think that sometimes he can overthink things, but I don't think that Nick Castellanos is a guy that doesn't care, doesn't prepare, doesn't try, or anything like that. I get why people are frustrated. I do. But, like, this idea, like, what is it? I guess he's got like pictures of Rob Thompson or something.
Yeah.
Dude, come on, like, you got to understand the big picture here and the why behind making a decision to play him every day. Now, could you sit him down for a day? Sure, because you do that with all players. Would I say that it might be overkill to play him quite literally every single day? Maybe, but I don't think it really matters. I just think if this is what the guy wants to do, and you certainly feel like you need to try to squeeze the opportunity out of him to possibly figure it out, then let him get those 4 at-bats on a Tuesday when you were thinking about sitting him down for a day. You got to understand the why behind it. And I'm just tired of people being like, let's insert, again, and I don't mean it as a shot at anybody else, but like, let's insert other player here because, that'll help us win tonight. I'm like, come on, man. Like, you got to think a little bit more big picture here. If you're asking the Phillies to think big picture and say, like, oh, does the regular season even matter? It's all about the World Series. Okay, I agree with that. It is all about winning a championship. Then you've got to take more macro level approaches to these things and not worry about fielding the best lineup against the Giants on a Wednesday night at the end of May.
Right.
You got to think big. So, and I mean, you got to think big too, because they do have an outfield problem, something that we've talked about extensively on this show. Fangraphs WAR, they're 27th in Fangraphs WAR, the Phillies outfielders overall. They're 25th in slugging percentage. They're 24th in on-base percentage. They're 20th in batting average. And quite frankly, if you look at yesterday's game, Christian Pache, 2 for 4. Castellanos, obviously, 3 for 5. Merrifield had a hit. These numbers look better overall today than they did if we had this conversation a day ago. I'm pretty sure the other day when I checked, they were like 28th in slug.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, they have a problem that they've got to address out there. So take the next 2 months to figure out what exactly it is you need to do to address it. Like, does it need to be a platoon guy or does it need to be a stud? Go figure it out. So that's my Nick Castellanos take, and it's the right one. And if you disagree with it, then you're wrong. I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it. So then that obviously leaves one other thing to talk about. What I thought was interesting about Monday's game, talking about, having to take the big picture and look at it and not maybe always go all in every single game. I think it's a nice transition of what we watched in the series opener with the Giants. I don't think that the Phillies did everything they could to win that game on Monday. And I don't just mean because they started Taijuan Walker, but that they stuck with them to the extent that they did. I said this earlier, probably about 2 weeks ago, maybe after the Marlins game. I think he went 6 innings and gave up 1 run in that game. And I said, it kind of looks like, and I stole this from somebody that I read online. They said, it looks like when outs happen against Taijuan Walker, that they're happening by accident. And it's kind of funny and it's sort of mean. But I kind of agree with it. It just looks like outs occur by accident with Taijuan Walker sometimes. And I thought he was, again, unimpressive against the Giants. He certainly was not helped by his defense again. The third base was just a disaster on Monday. And I get that. But you're kind of into this thing now. He's made some starts. I thought on Monday what was really weird is they get the lead 4-3, and I think he's only at like 62 pitches coming back out for the 5th. But it's the 3rd time he's going through the order, and I'm saying to myself, okay, the whole idea here last year was that he got deeper into games and he would settle down and he could end up giving you some length after early struggles. And I guess you're to some extent banking on him returning to that form. He gives up the runs early, maybe he gets into a groove and he gets you through 6, maybe 7 innings. You knew that he was going to give up runs the 3rd time through the order there. So they send him back out for the 5th. And okay, I guess. But then they bring him back out for the 6th. And I was surprised by that because I felt like you later use Matt Strahm when it's 8-4 in the bottom of the 8th inning. And I'm like, man, like, isn't this the perfect spot to let Strahm go into the 5th, maybe the 6th, and bridge this to your bullpen and maybe take a shot to win a series opener? So I guess 2 things. One, let's talk about the game. Like, did that make sense to you to continue to use Taijuan Walker? And then really big picture, to me, this is probably wrong. So for like the Phillies people listening to this, I'm sure you'll chuckle and be like, huh, idiot. But like, it felt like the most important thing for the Phillies on Monday was showing Taijuan Walker that he's not good enough right now. Like, it was like they were letting him build a case against himself. And I know that is preposterous, but like, is it?
Well, here's the thing. And yeah, I questioned him coming back out once you took the lead in that game and really, getting length. I didn't see it. Like you pulled him the previous start in the 5th inning, right? And I know his pitch count was a little higher, but you pulled him there 1 out away from being able to get a win, just because you weren't comfortable with where he was at. And now here you are, you're coming off of a loss, coming off of losing your first series in a month and a half. And your team fights back and gets the lead after he struggled early. And it's like, okay, this is an opportunity. And you left him out there to get banged around a little bit more. And the reality, I guess, so I don't agree with it personally, leaving him in, but I guess this is how I look at it, and this maybe probably addresses your second comment. I look at what the Phillies are doing, and they say, okay, what is the benefit of Taijuan Walker? And the benefit of Taijuan Walker is he's an innings eater. Guy can throw a lot of innings, right? May not be great innings, but he can throw a lot of innings. And there is value in that kind of pitcher as your number 5 because it saves your bullpen, right? They don't have to be used as much. All he has to do is keep you in the game. Even if his ERA hovers around 4.5, 5, whatever, that's okay. If he could get us through 6 innings in a start, that's beneficial. And so I think that the Phillies are trying to get that out of him when he starts. But you're right. In a sense, he's not even able to give you that anymore without really kind of losing the game and letting the game get away from him. We've talked over the last year how he's been a little bit of the lucky pitcher, getting those lucky wins because the team hits for him. I think somebody there was I don't know what the actual number is, but the average number of runs the Phillies score in games that he started is like significantly higher than for everybody else. So he is fortunate in that regard. So I think you got to look and see, can he get us through 6 innings and be viable? And I don't think that he can. Here's the thing that I wanted to add to this conversation, Bob. So he'll start Sunday. That's his next start. When's his next start after that? Have you looked at the calendar?
Well, they would, I believe, if everything stays in turn, he would start in London, right?
Yeah, but will he? So see, this is where I think that it's interesting because the Phillies basically have a mini all-star break here in a sense because they get back-to-back days off on Thursday and Friday, and then they have another day off on the 10th. I can't fathom them making Zach Wheeler sit for 7 days if they stay in turn. So what I think is going to happen here is if you look at Walker's spot in the rotation and say let's say he is your number 5 guy, okay? He will not absolutely be needed again for a couple weeks. I look at it and say probably the 17th against San Diego is the next time you need the number 5 starter. And technically, if you really wanted to say, hey, we want to get a little bit of length out of Spencer Turnbull for a game, maybe go like a bullpenish type of game, if you did that, because there's an off day on the 20th as well, right? They have 4 off days in the span of 15 days. If you have an off day there, you may not need the number 5 starter again until the 24th in Detroit. And so the question then becomes, what do you do with these guys? And I'm not convinced that unless Taijuan Walker has a good start Sunday night in Sunday Night Baseball, unless he has a good start on Sunday. By the way, it always seems the Phillies have like their worst pitchers pitching on Sunday Night Baseball. I don't know why this happens, but it just always seems that way. But if he doesn't have a good start on Sunday, we may not see him again for a while. And it's really kind of interesting. I think this is his Waterloo game on Sunday, in my estimation.
Like he's 18 with the Phillies in parts of 2 seasons. He's 18-7, which I know doesn't matter. And he has a 4.56 ERA. You zoom out far enough and you're like, well, that's not bad, I guess.
That's great for a number 5.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And you've been lucky that Sanchez has taken such a significant leap. Like, that's where they would be getting killed right now. You signed him to be your 3rd best starter, and he's your 5th best starter by a mile. Yeah. Well, he's really your 6th best starter, but in this rotation, he's your 5th. I do wonder, like, is that you called it the Waterloo game, but like, is that where you kind of maybe evaluate when you have that extended break to say, like, okay, now if the Turnbull usage and innings part of the equation was really a big driver in all of this, you've sort of alleviated that at this point. Right. You've gone now 6 weeks without using him in the rotation. So you could probably insert him back and not really worry about all that.
Correct.
You cut the innings. I don't know. I'm not calling for his job. I'm not saying that they should take him. I guess I am, but like, I'm willing to kind of ride it out a little bit longer, but he's got to show more. Like, And I almost feel like the Phillies have been very fair with him. If not using him in the postseason, in his eyes, was unfair last year, which I think it feels he believes that, then I think the Phillies have been very fair to him in that really he didn't lose his job to injury. He was going to lose his job to somebody who was just performing at a phenomenal level. They're going to let him take 7 or 8 turns, which is a quarter of the season, a quarter of a starter's usage in a season. That's a reasonable amount of season. Eight starts. He's made 6, I believe, right now. Like, I think that they've handled this the right way. If he gets through 8 starts, 7, 8 starts, and he's got what's he at right now? Is he in mid-5s?
I think, yeah. I think
right?
it is. Yeah.
He's in the mid-5s, and it's not a product of bad luck. I mean, go look at the Baseball Savant page. Go look at all the metrics, like in relation his performance against the rest of the sport. Everything looks bad. So it's not like, oh man, he's a little help here and there, and it would actually look a lot better. I think that there's been a lot of starts where you look at him and go like, damn, like he actually survived that, huh? So I think that they've been pretty fair. Like at some point, this is about performance. And I think they have to be nearing a point where they look at what they have. Now, I just got done saying, like, look, Castellanos, I don't care about like the contract is part of it. And you might be saying, well, the contract has to be part of it with Taijuan Walker as well. Well, sure it is. But Taijuan Walker does not represent the most upside either. Like that's where the Castellanos and Walker situations differ. If the Phillies had an everyday right fielder on their bench right now who could hit 280 with 33 home runs, and he wasn't playing at the expense of Nick Castellanos, so well, all right, we got something different to talk about here. And I'm not saying Spencer Turnbull is going to be that guy, but if we're being fair, which is how I frame this whole conversation, then he's more than owed the right to go prove that he can't sustain what he did his first 5 or 6 starts, right? Like, you got this guy just languishing out in the bullpen right now, mopping up games, and he's not sharp. Like, I can't evaluate Spencer Turnbull right now in any way, shape, or form the way that he's being used.
No. And I think it's kind of unfair because he's really, I thought that the thought was initially that they were going to kind of try and use him as like a piggyback guy.
Yeah. Cristopher Sanchez basically said, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah. Well, then they could have then used him as a piggyback for Walker, and they didn't do that either.
But as you said, like the whole appeal there is eat those innings. So, you're still only in theory going to let him go 2 or 3, but these 1 inning appearances, in a way, it sounds kind of nuts, but he comes into a game and he needs 31 pitches to get through the inning. I'm like, well, that's good. That keeps him more stretched out. I don't want to see him get through an inning in 8 pitches.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, yeah, and I guess like that's the the backwards.
Yeah, I know he's doing additional throwing on the side. Like I get all that. I almost say that like tongue in cheek, but like it's
for sure.
It's just it's a strange situation. I know that they are aware that it's a strange situation. I know that they have to sort through it, but they might be coming to a head on that where they've got to think about what this looks like.
Yeah, it's getting there. And I think that's why I said I think Sunday's a very, very big start for Taijuan Walker.
Yeah. We'll see, I guess. All right, let's get to one last thing. I know we're going a little extra here today.
Yeah, a little longer today, but that's okay. How do we not talk about the Mets? After what just happened. So I don't know if anybody saw it, but if you haven't seen it, they're getting smashed again by the Dodgers. They got swept. They're now 11 games under 500, but pitcher Jorge Lopez is on the mound and facing Shohei Ohtani, and Ohtani has a check swing that was really a check swing upon review, but he starts barking at the third base umpire, that it was a swing, and he gets thrown out of the game. On his way off the field, he pulls his jersey out, loses his hat, throws his glove into the stands, right? And so it's kind of like a bad attitude kind of thing. But that's not the end, Bob. He goes into the locker room and he says that the Mets are the worst team in probably the whole fucking MLB. He says he has no regrets about what happened. He would do it again. He just doesn't fucking care anymore, right? Yeah. He's like, I'll be here if they want me here tomorrow. I was like, what is happening?
He was basically like, please get rid of me. Like you could see it, like he launches the glove, right? And you're thinking in that moment, like the glove leaves his hand and the glove is floating into the stands. And like a lot of guys would do that and immediately be like, oh no, what have I done? Like I might have just cost myself a job. No, not this guy. A couple minutes later, reporters get in. Remember, there's a team meeting. They have a team meeting, right? Like they're talking. Like there's an extended period of time before a microphone gets in this guy's face. No, he's like, I might play on the worst team in the entire MLB, and then people are like, no, that's not what he said. He's saying he might be the worst teammate in MLB after what he's done. That's what he has said. So then they ask him for clarification, like, is this what you meant? And he goes, no. He's like, I said whatever I said, like it is what it is, sort of.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh, okay. Like, so I mean, he had more than ample time to go, like, my bad. Like, it just the moment got away from me. I need to do a better job. We'll handle it internally. Like, all good. No, he just basically said, get me out of here, man. I'll go anywhere else. Even if, like, and look, there's such a need for pitching that I'm probably pretty sure that he'll end up somewhere else this season. But I mean, I hope it's not here. Someone actually made the joke. They're like, well, he's got to be motivated after this. He a change of scenery would do him good, and he hates the Mets. Bring him to Philly. You know?
Could you imagine if the Phillies signed him and he goes and pitches against the Mets in London?
The Mets, like the thing that's been happening with the Mets lately, it's that, and the manager said it, and like everyone kind of rolls their eyes, but he's not wrong. Like they're not getting blown out of games. They did. Yesterday's game got away from them at the end.
Yeah,
but they actually were like competing in that game. Just go back this past weekend against the Giants. It's like lead on Friday night, blown. Saturday, blown. Now they come back and they steal one Sunday, but then in the first game of the doubleheader against the Dodgers, like we talked about, they're only 4 games out of last wild card spot. They're winning that game from start to finish. They blow it. Then they get beaten game 2. They get 3-hit shutout. Then yesterday is a disaster. Like they can't just lose. It's got to be like inventing new ways to lose in the most embarrassing fashion where it gets a national spotlight on you.
Yeah.
They're better than that. Like they are better than what you've seen out of them. But that season is going so far off the rails that I just don't know that you come back from that. Like I don't know that you come back to that even in the way that like you win 78 games and are like respectably bad. Like they're trending towards like strip it down, 69 wins, 72 wins, total mess. Like that's what that looks like. They just can't hit. They cannot hit. They can't hit.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. That was when I saw that happen yesterday. I was in tears because it was
an all timer. I mean, that's like LOL Mets to the max. You know, like that's an all like in the pantheon of LOL Mets. Like that is now up there. Like that is in the mix.
Yes, 1,000%, 1,000% it is. So anyway, we had to bring up the Mets just because it's fun.
Crazy. By the way, like real quick, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah,
Braves, man, like all of a sudden they cannot hit. Like they can't hit.
I'm curious to see what happens there.
I've watched all 3 of those games against the Nationals this week, and like again, if you watched all 3 games with the Rockies or the Phillies play the Giants, you'd say the other team's better.
Yeah.
So it's unfair to do that, but like the Nationals are like taking it to the Braves right now, taking it to them.
Yeah.
Had Max Fried not been out of his mind on Tuesday night, Nationals would be up 3-0 in that series right now in Atlanta.
Yeah. It's curious. I'm curious to see what happens there because, I mean, they're still in a comfortable spot. They're the lead wild card. They got 4.5 game lead over the Cubs, who are the first team out. It's way early, right? There's so much time left, and I think that they're a much better team than they've played. But if they continue to struggle and regress back into a weird wild card race of a bunch of teams that are around 500 or just over 500, I'm curious to see if they really make a push or if they just chalk it up to let's leave it.
Maybe they got to do what the Phillies have done, which is like back in 22, where it's like we're going to make maybe we make the playoffs. We're going to make the playoffs, but we're not going to do some seismic thing to make us that mega team. Like we're not doing that.
Correct.
Like, we'll just see what happens.
See what happens and reconvene next year if necessary once everybody's healthy.
I
wonder. I do wonder. So Anyway.
All right. Well, for Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. You can follow us on Twitter. Follow the show at Up Phillies. You can follow Anthony at AntSanPhilly. You can follow me at Bob_Wankel. We will be back on Monday of next week following 3-game set with the Cardinals. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon.